My finger hovered over the play button as 43 people stared at me in my grandmother's living room, and I knew that in exactly 37 seconds, my mother and sister would be in handcuffs. The video on my laptop showed something nobody in this room had seen yet: footage of a lawyer hunched over legal documents, carefully tracing my grandmother's signature while she lay unconscious in a hospital bed 2 floors below. And in the background, my own mother and sister toasting with champagne, celebrating what they thought was the perfect crime. I had spent $42,000 over 18 months funding their lies. I'd been told my grandmother was too senile to see me, missed her funeral because they never told me she died, and discovered through a stranger's Facebook post that the woman who raised me was already buried. My hands trembled as I connected the laptop to the projector because I knew what came next would detonate like a bomb. My mother was about to scream that I was lying. My sister's livestream was about to capture her own arrest. And the family that spent a year systematically erasing me from my grandmother's life was about to learn that I had receipts, witnesses, and a detective standing outside the front door. But before I tell you how I brought them to justice, if you've ever felt used by the people who were supposed to love you most, hit that like button. Subscribe because you're going to want to hear how this ends. Drop a comment telling me if you've ever had to cut off toxic family. Now let me take you back to where this nightmare really began. 18 months before that courtroom moment, I was a different person. I was Alara Vance, a 29-year-old architect finally making a name for myself in a competitive field. I had just landed a meeting with Marcus Thorne, one of the most influential real estate developers in the city. This was the kind of opportunity that could define my entire career. I had spent weeks preparing my presentation, perfecting every detail of the waterfront development proposal that could transform the downtown harbor. The morning of the presentation, I woke up at 5 a.m., too nervous to sleep. I went over my notes one more time, checked my portfolio twice, and arrived at Marcus Thorne's sleek downtown office 30 minutes early. His assistant offered me coffee while I waited in the marble lobby, and I tried to steady my breathing. This was it. Everything I had worked for was about to pay off. When Marcus finally invited me into his conference room, I felt a surge of confidence. He was exactly as I had imagined, tall and composed with sharp gray eyes that seemed to analyze everything. I set up my presentation boards and began to speak. My voice was steady as I walked him through the architectural vision, the sustainable design elements, the projected returns. He nodded, asked insightful questions, and I could feel the momentum building. This was going well. This was going incredibly well. Then my phone started vibrating on the table. I glanced down and saw it was my mother calling. I apologized to Marcus and silenced it, continuing with my presentation. But then it buzzed again. And again. Text messages started flooding in. I tried to ignore them, but the constant vibration was impossible to dismiss. Marcus noticed my distraction, and I saw a flicker of concern cross his face. During a pause, I quickly glanced at my phone screen. There were 6 missed calls from my mother, Serafina, and a string of text messages. But what made my blood run cold was a message from an unknown number that read, "Your mother is running another scam. Grandma Beatrice is in danger. Don't trust anyone in the Thorne family." I felt the room tilt slightly. My hands went numb. I nearly knocked over my coffee cup onto the blueprints. Marcus leaned forward with genuine concern and asked if everything was all right. I forced a smile and told him it was just a family matter. Nothing urgent. But my mind was racing. What did that message mean? Why would someone warn me not to trust the Thornes? And what did my grandmother have to do with any of this? I somehow managed to finish the presentation, though I could barely focus on my own words. Marcus said he would review my proposal and be in touch soon. But I could tell the energy had shifted. The moment I left his office, I called my mother back. She answered on the first ring, her voice dripping with that familiar sweet concern that always made me feel guilty for not responding faster. She told me she was so sorry to bother me during my big meeting, but there was an emergency. The heating system at Grandma Beatrice's house had broken down completely, and with winter approaching, it needed to be fixed immediately. Grandma was already catching a cold, and at her age, these things could turn serious quickly. Could I possibly transfer $5,000 to cover the emergency repair just this once? She would pay me back as soon as her consulting check came through. I sat in my car in the parking garage, staring at the phone. Part of me wanted to say no. I had been lending money to my mother for years, and she never paid it back. But then I thought about Grandma Beatrice. Frail and elderly, shivering in a cold house. I couldn't let that happen. I opened my banking app and transferred the money. Within seconds, my mother sent back a string of heart emojis and thanking me profusely, telling me I was the best daughter anyone could ask for. But then another text came through from that same unknown number. You just made it worse. Every dollar you send is another chain around your grandmother's neck. Stop feeding them. I felt sick to my stomach. Who was sending these messages? What did they know that I didn't? I drove to my mother's house, a modest colonial in the suburbs that Grandma Beatrice had helped her buy years ago. As I pulled onto the street, I immediately noticed something was wrong. The driveway was packed with cars. I recognized my Aunt Lydia's silver Mercedes and Uncle Silas's black pickup truck. There were lights blazing in every window, and I could hear music and laughter from inside. This didn't look like an emergency heating repair situation. This looked like a party. I parked on the street and walked up to the house, my heart pounding. Through the large front windows, I could see into the dining room. My mother was there, holding a champagne glass high in the air. My younger sister Briar was next to her, her phone in one hand, taking selfies. Aunt Lydia and Uncle Silas were at the table, all of them laughing like they had just won the lottery. The scene was so jarring, so completely opposite of what I had expected, that I stood frozen on the front lawn. I pulled out my phone and checked Briar's Instagram. She had posted just minutes ago. It was a group photo of all of them, glasses raised, huge smiles on their faces. The caption read, "So blessed to have real family. Cutting out toxic people is self-care. No more energy vampires in 2024. The hashtags included family first, boundaries, and no contact. I felt tears burning in my eyes. Were they talking about me? Was I the toxic person they were celebrating getting rid of? My hands were shaking as I called Briar. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice cold and flat, in a way I had never heard before. She told me she assumed I had gotten the message. I asked what message. She sighed dramatically and said they had all decided as a family that I was no longer welcome. I was too controlling, too judgmental, and frankly, they were all tired of walking on eggshells around me. I should not call anymore. I should not come by. It was over. I demanded to know what they were talking about. I had just sent Mom $5,000 for Grandma's heating emergency. Where was Grandma? Was she okay? Briar laughed. Actually laughed, and said Grandma was fine. She was in a facility now where she belonged. And as for the money, well, they needed it more than I did, since I was always so high and mighty with my architect salary. Then she hung up. I stood there on the sidewalk, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the deadline. I felt like the ground had opened up beneath me. My own family had just cut me off, and I didn't even understand why. I had spent years supporting them, helping them, being there whenever they needed anything. And this was how they repaid me. I drove home in a daze and spent the rest of the night going through my bank statements. I needed to see the full picture. I pulled up every transaction from the past 18 months and cross-referenced them with Briar's Instagram posts. What I found made me physically ill. Every single emergency Mom had called me about, every urgent expense, every crisis that required immediate money, lined up perfectly with Briar's extravagant lifestyle posts. The $3,000 for Mom's car transmission coincided with Briar's weekend trip to Miami. The $2,000 for emergency dental work matched the date Briar posted photos of her new designer handbag. The $1,500 for property taxes was the same week. Briar went to a luxury spa resort. On and on it went. In total, I had sent them over $42,000 in just a year and a half. $42,000 that had funded vacations, shopping sprees, and parties. While I worked 60-hour weeks and lived in a cramped apartment, I felt stupid. I felt used, but more than anything, I felt angry. They had played me perfectly, using my love for Grandma as leverage, guilting me with family obligation, and then celebrating behind my back while spending my money. I decided right then that I was going to find out what was really going on with Grandma Beatrice. Something was very wrong, and that anonymous text had been right. I needed to stop trusting my family. The next morning, I remembered something. Years ago, Mom had given me her old tablet when she upgraded to a new one. I had kept it in a drawer, mostly forgotten. I dug it out and powered it on. To my surprise, it still had her Facebook account logged in. I knew what I was about to do was wrong. An invasion of privacy. But I also knew they were hiding something from me. I opened her messages. What I found made my heart stop. There were dozens of conversations between my mother and Briar, going back months. They talked openly about manipulating me, about how easy I was to guilt trip, about maximizing how much money they could extract before I caught on. But worse than that were the messages about Grandma. My mother had written to Briar. We need to move fast on the Beatrice situation. Jackson says if we wait too long, she might change her mind or get too senile to sign anything. I've scheduled the appointment for Tuesday. Make sure you're there to witness. And for God's sake, keep Alara away. She'll ruin everything. Briar had responded. Don't worry. I blocked her number on Grandma's phone months ago. She thinks Grandma just doesn't want to talk to her. It's perfect. I scrolled frantically through more messages. There were discussions about a lawyer named Jackson Croft, about getting power of attorney, about a new will that would cut me out entirely. And then I saw it. A message from a distant cousin I barely knew, offering condolences. R.I.P. Aunt Beatrice. She'll be missed. The message was dated 3 days ago. My grandmother was dead. My grandmother had died 3 days ago. And no one had told me. I couldn't breathe. I ran to the bathroom and threw up. When I finally steadied myself, I called my mother. She answered cheerfully, as if nothing was wrong. I asked her point blank if Grandma was dead. There was a pause, and then she said in a syrupy voice that, oh dear. She had completely forgotten to mention it. Yes, Grandma had passed away last week. The funeral was tomorrow. Just immediate family. She said. I wouldn't want to make things awkward given how I had been acting lately. I screamed into the phone. I called her every name I could think of. I told her I knew about the messages, about the scam, about everything. She hung up on me. I immediately called back, but she had blocked my number. So had Briar. I was completely shut out. I sat on my bathroom floor and cried for hours. I cried for my grandmother, who I had loved deeply and who had apparently been isolated from me in her final months. I cried for the family I thought I had, which turned out to be a lie. And I cried for myself, for being naive enough to believe that blood meant loyalty, but then, through the tears, I felt something else rising. Enge, cold, focused rage. They thought they could do this to me. They thought they could steal my grandmother's legacy and leave me with nothing. They had made a terrible mistake. I was going to fight back. And I was going to win. The next morning, I started making calls. First, I looked up estate lawyers in the area. I found Elias Thorne, an older attorney with an impeccable reputation for handling complex family disputes. When I called his office, his assistant tried to schedule me for the following week. But I told her this was an emergency involving potential fraud and elder abuse. She put me through immediately. Elias met with me that afternoon. I brought printed copies of the Facebook messages, my bank statements showing the transfers, and everything I could find about Grandma Beatrice's assets. Elias listened carefully, his expression growing darker as I laid out the timeline. When I finished, he leaned back in his leather chair and told me this was one of the most blatant cases of financial exploitation he had seen in years. He explained that we needed to find Grandma's original will first. If she had made a recent will under duress or without proper mental capacity, we might be able to challenge it. He pulled up his files and, to my relief, told me he had represented Grandma Beatrice 4 years earlier. He retrieved the document from his archives and showed it to me. In that will, Grandma had left everything to me. Her house by the lake, her savings, her personal belongings. Everything. The will was crystal clear. Elias warned me that proving fraud would be difficult. We needed concrete evidence that the new will, if it existed, had been obtained through deception or forgery. We needed to move quickly before assets were transferred or hidden. He asked if I knew which facility Grandma had been in during her final days. I didn't. But I was determined to find out. I spent the rest of the day calling every nursing home and assisted living facility in the county. Finally, At the 7th place, Shady Grove Senior Care, the receptionist confirmed that Beatrice Dubois had been a resident there until her death last week. I asked if I could come collect her personal belongings. The receptionist put me on hold, then came back and said I would need to speak with the director, Quentin Mercer. I drove to Shady Grove immediately. It was a nice facility, well-maintained with cheerful yellow walls and flower beds out front. But the moment I walked in and asked to see Mr. Mercer, I felt the atmosphere change. The receptionist's friendly demeanor disappeared. She made a phone call, whispering into the receiver while glancing at me nervously. Quentin Mercer appeared a few minutes later. He was a thin man in his 50s with a too-perfect smile and cold eyes. He told me very politely that I was not authorized to access Ms. Dubois' room or belongings. Only the designated power of attorney could do that. And according to their records, that was Serafina Vance. If I had questions, I should contact the family's attorney. I looked around the reception area and spotted a photo collage on the wall. My eyes landed on a picture of my mother and Briar, arms around each other, smiling broadly in front of the facility sign. I felt rage boiling up inside me. I asked Mercer when that photo was taken. He glanced at it and said it was from a recent family appreciation event. They had been very generous donors. I left before I said something I would regret. But as I walked across the parking lot to my car, I heard rapid footsteps behind me. I turned to see a young woman in scrubs, Anurse, hurrying toward me. She glanced back at the building nervously, then grabbed my arm and pulled me behind a van. She introduced herself as Anya Sharma. She told me she had been one of Grandma Beatrice's primary nurses during her final weeks. Tears filled her eyes as she spoke. She said she had been horrified by what she witnessed, but had been afraid to speak up because she needed this job. But seeing me just now, seeing how they had shut me out, she couldn't stay silent anymore. Anya told me that Grandma Beatrice had asked about me constantly. Every single day. She would ask when Alara was coming to visit. Anya had tried calling the numbers on file, but they were all for Serafina and Briar. Grandma kept saying something was wrong, that her phone wasn't working right, that someone had changed her contacts. Anya had assumed it was just confusion from her dementia. Then, about 2 weeks before Grandma died, Serafina and Briar showed up with a man in an expensive suit. Anya said she later learned he was a lawyer named Jackson Croft. They had gone into Grandma's room with a stack of papers. Normally, when legal documents were being signed, facility policy required a nurse to be present to verify the resident understood what they were signing. But Mercer had personally dismissed Anya and locked the door. She told me she had stood in the hallway, uneasy. After about 30 minutes, they had all emerged, looking pleased with themselves. Grandma was alone in her room, looking confused and upset. When Anya went to check on her, Grandma told her that her daughter had visited and that they had talked about her will. But Grandma seemed uncertain, saying she didn't remember signing anything and asking if Alara had been there too. Later that week, Anya had overheard Mercer on the phone, laughing about a substantial donation the facility was receiving. He had specifically mentioned the Vance family's generosity. Anya was certain something illegal had happened, but she had no proof and no power to do anything about it. I asked Anya if there were security cameras in the facility. She nodded and said there were cameras in all the hallways but not inside the rooms. Then she lowered her voice even more and told me she worked the night shift sometimes. She had access to the security system. If I gave her my email, she might be able to send me something, but I had to promise never to reveal where I got it. She could lose her license. I gave her my email and my phone number. She squeezed my hand and told me Grandma had talked about me with such love. She said I was the only one who came to see her without asking for anything, who would read to her and do physical therapy exercises together. Anya said Grandma called me her true granddaughter. I started crying right there in the parking lot. Anya hugged me and then hurried back inside. That night, I could barely sleep. I kept checking my email every few minutes. Finally, at 2 a.m, a message came through from an anonymous Gmail account. The subject line read, "You deserve to know." There was a video file attached. I downloaded it and pressed play. The footage was black and white, stamped with a date and time from 2 weeks earlier. It showed the hallway outside what I assumed was Grandma's room. I watched as Serafina, Briar, Jackson Croft, and Quentin Mercer walked down the hallway carrying briefcases and a bottle of champagne. They were laughing. When they reached the door, Mercer unlocked it and they all went inside. The camera angle didn't show into the room, but I could see them through the partially open door. Jackson was leaning over a table, carefully tracing something on a document. I watched in horror as he forged what must have been Grandma's signature. Comparing it to another paper he held up, Massa stood beside him, holding an official notary stamp. Serafina and Briar watched from behind, sipping champagne and checking their phones. I played the video again and again, my hands shaking with rage. On the fourth viewing, I noticed something that made everything even worse. Through the doorway, I could see Grandma's hospital bed. It was empty. I frantically texted the number Anya had given me, asking where Grandma was during this. She replied quickly, saying Grandma had been taken for x-rays that afternoon. It was on her schedule. They had known she would be out of the room. They had deliberately waited until my grandmother was gone, forged her signature, had it notarized by a corrupt facility director, and celebrated with champagne. This wasn't just greed. This was calculated. Criminal fraud. I immediately forwarded the video to Elias Thorne. Even though it was the middle of the night, he responded within minutes. He told me this was exactly the evidence we needed. He would file for an emergency hearing to freeze all of Grandma's assets and contest the fraudulent will, but he also said I should consider going to the police. What they had done wasn't just a civil matter. It was criminal. The next morning, I contacted Detective Kalen Reed from the Economic Crimes Unit. I brought him everything: the video, the Facebook messages, my financial records, Elias's copy of the original will. Reed was a sharp-eyed detective in his 40s who had seen every kind of family scam imaginable. He watched the video twice, his expression hardening. He told me this was an open and shut case of fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. He would start an investigation immediately. Over the next few days, things moved quickly. Elias filed the court documents. Reed began interviewing witnesses, and I started receiving increasingly desperate messages from Briar. She had unblocked my number, apparently unaware that I was building a case against them. The first message said, "Hey sis, hate to bother you with everything going on, but could you help me out with some money for new camera equipment? Just a small loan, $1,200. I'm starting a business." I stared at the message in disbelief. After everything they had done, she still had the audacity to ask me for money. I replied with one word: no. Her response came instantly. "Wow, Grandma just died, and you can't even help your own sister. That says everything about you." I didn't reply. Let her think whatever she wanted. She would understand soon enough. A week later, I received a strange email from Serafina. The subject line read, "Annual Family Gathering." The message was overly formal and sweet, inviting the entire extended family to a reunion at the lake house. Grandma's lake house. The house that, according to their forged will, now belonged to them. I showed the email to Elias and Detective Reed. Reed smiled grimly and said this was perfect. They wanted to celebrate their victory publicly. We would let them have their party, but we would be there too. With a few surprises of our own, I reached out to the one family member I knew I could trust, Aunt Lena Dubois. Grandma's younger sister. Aunt Lena had been estranged from Serafina for years after my mother had tried to borrow money from her and then spread vicious rumors when Lena refused. When I called her and explained everything, Lena listened quietly. Then she told me she had been waiting for this day. She had known Serafina was poison, and she had tried to warn Grandma years ago. Aunt Lena agreed to help. She also put me in touch with a handwriting expert, Dr. Eris Thorne, who could provide expert testimony about the forged signature. Dr. Thorne examined the video and several samples of Grandma's real signature. His conclusion was unequivocal. The signature on the new will was a forgery, and not even a particularly good one. He would testify to that in court. The day of the family gathering arrived. I drove to the lake house with Aunt Lena. We had spent the previous day secretly installing hidden cameras throughout the main rooms and setting up a projector and sound system in the living room. This was going to be a reunion they would never forget. Cars filled the driveway and lined the street. I recognized vehicles belonging to various aunts, uncles, and cousins. Everyone in the family had been invited. Everyone except me. Of course. But I had invited myself. Aunt Lena and I walked in through the front door without knocking. The house that Grandma had loved so much, with its wide windows overlooking the lake and the garden she had tended for 40 years. I was now filled with people who had never truly appreciated it. Serafina was holding court in the living room, a microphone in her hand as if she were hosting some kind of ceremony. When she saw me, her face went white. Briar's mouth fell open. The room went silent. Serafina recovered quickly, putting on a plastic smile. She told everyone that this was awkward, that Alara had been excluded for good reason, and that I should leave immediately. Several relatives looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. I walked to the center of the room and stood beside Aunt Lena. I told Serafina I wasn't going anywhere. This was my grandmother's house, and I had every right to be here. Serafina laughed, a shrill, artificial sound, and said that actually, the house was hers now, according to Grandma's will. Everyone knew Grandma had been disappointed in me and had decided to leave everything to her daughter instead. That's when I pulled out my laptop and connected it to the projector we had set up. Serafina's face flickered with uncertainty. I told the room that I had some videos I wanted to share. Videos that would explain exactly what had happened to Grandma Beatrice's will. The first video appeared on the screen. It was footage I had taken myself during visits to Grandma over the years. There was Grandma and me in her garden, planting tulips together. Grandma and me reading books in her sunroom. Grandma and me doing physical therapy exercises after her hip surgery. In every clip, Grandma was smiling, laughing, calling me her angel. The room watched in silence. Then I played the second video, the security footage from Shady Grove. I watched the faces in the room as they saw Jackson Croft forging the signature, Mercer stamping it with the notary seal, Serafina and Briar toasting with champagne while Grandma's empty bed sat in the background. Gasps filled the room. Someone said, "Oh my God," loudly. Briar's face went from pink to bright red to deathly pale. I paused the video at the clearest frame, showing Jackson tracing the signature. I told the room that this was how Grandma's will had been changed. Not because she wanted it changed, but because these people had forged a legal document while she was literally out of the room getting x-rays. This was fraud. This was elder abuse. And it was criminal. Serafina tried to interrupt, saying I was lying, that the video was doctored, that I was mentally unstable. But I played the third piece of evidence, an audio recording. It was Grandma's voice, weak but clear, recorded by Anya during one of their conversations just weeks before she died. Grandma talked about her will, explaining why she had left everything to me. She said Alara was the only one who visited her without asking for money. She said Serafina never came without demanding something. She said Briar only showed up to take selfies for her Instagram followers. She wanted Alara to have the lake house, to have her savings, to have everything, because I was the only one who had truly loved her. By the time the recording ended, several people in the room were crying. Aunt Lena stepped forward and addressed the crowd. She told them this wasn't the first time Serafina had done something like this. Years ago, Serafina had tried to manipulate their parents' estate too. This was a pattern, and it was time someone stopped her. That's when the front door opened. Detective Reed walked in, followed by 2 uniformed officers. The room erupted in confused murmurs. Reed held up his badge and announced that he had warrants for the arrest of Serafina Vance, Briar Vance, Jackson Croft, and Quentin Mercer on charges of fraud, forgery, notary misconduct, and financial exploitation of an elderly person. Jackson tried to run. He literally pushed past relatives and headed for the back door. But an officer caught him before he made it to the deck. Reed read him his Miranda rights while Jackson shouted that this was all a misunderstanding. Mercer stood frozen, his face the color of old newspaper. Serafina and Briar clung to each other, both of them sobbing. Serafina looked at me with wild eyes and said, "I couldn't do this. She was my mother. Family doesn't betray family." I looked at her calmly and told her she was right. Family doesn't betray family, but she had betrayed me. And worse, she had betrayed Grandma. Now she was going to face the consequences. The officers handcuffed all 4 of them, Aunt Lydia and Uncle Silas, who had been standing smugly in the corner earlier, now backed away with horrified expressions. Uncle Silas shouted that they didn't know anything about this, that they were innocent. Detective Reed told him no one was accusing them of anything yet. But they might want to get lawyers anyway. As the police led Serafina, Breyer, Jackson, and Mercer out of the house, Breyer's phone, which had been sitting on the coffee table, still running a live stream, showed comments flooding in from her followers. "This is insane. Did we just watch people get arrested on live?" So all those posts about toxic family were about her being toxic. Her follower count was dropping in real time. I watched it fall from 52,000 to 48,000 to 45,000 as people clicked unfollow. After they were gone, Elias Thorne stepped forward. He had been standing quietly in the doorway the entire time. He held up a document and announced to the remaining family members that he had the original will, properly executed 4 years ago with his office serving as witness. According to Beatrice Dubois's true and lawful will, the bulk of her estate was left to her granddaughter Alara Vance. The lake house, the savings accounts, the investment portfolio, all of it. Several relatives congratulated me. Others left quietly, embarrassed that they had believed Serafina's lies. A few apologized for not speaking up sooner. I accepted their apologies, but knew I would never forget who had stood by silently while my mother tried to destroy me. The legal process that followed took months. Serafina was sentenced to 7 years in prison for fraud and elder abuse. Breyer received 4 years. Jackson Croft, as an officer of the court who had knowingly forged legal documents, got 8 years and was disbarred. Quentin Mercer took up la deal, agreeing to testify against the others and admitting that he had accepted bribes to facilitate the fraud. He lost his license and faced 5 years probation. During the trial, I learned even more disturbing details. Serafina had started a GoFundMe campaign called Help Us Fight Family Betrayal, claiming I had stolen from Grandma and was trying to take everything. She had raised over $30,000 from sympathetic strangers before the campaign was shut down for fraud. All that money had to be returned, and I used it to establish the Beatrice Dubois Memorial Fund, which provides support for elder abuse victims and works to reform oversight in nursing homes. While Serafina was awaiting sentencing, I received a letter from her. It was 8 pages long, full of justifications and excuses. She claimed she had been under financial stress. She said Breyer had needed help getting started in life. She wrote that she had always intended to share Grandma's money with me eventually. She even tried to suggest that Grandma would have wanted the family to stay together despite everything. The letter ended with a carefully worded non-apology that blamed everyone but herself. I wrote back a single sentence. "You were right all along. We are done." Then I added a postscript. "Don't expect money in your commissary account. Try living like Breyer taught you, pretending wealth you don't have." I never heard from her again. Breyer tried to maintain her social media presence from prison for a while. She posted a few messages through friends, trying to spin the story as if she were the victim of a vindictive sister. But the public wasn't buying it. The video of the forgery had gone viral. Her Instagram account was eventually suspended for violating terms of service after too many people reported her posts. The last thing visible on her feed was that photo from the celebration party, with thousands of comments calling her a fraud and a thief. The hardest part of everything wasn't the trial, or even losing my family. It was dealing with the grief I had been denied. I never got to say goodbye to Grandma Beatrice. I never got to attend her funeral. So I created my own memorial. I visited her grave every week with fresh yellow daffodils. Her favorite. I restored her garden at the lake house exactly as she had kept it. I framed photos of us together and hung them throughout the house. I also started having weekly phone calls with Aunt Lena, who became like a second grandmother to me. She shared stories about Grandma from when they were young, memories I had never heard. She also helped me understand that cutting off toxic family wasn't cruel. It was necessary for survival. My career, which I had worried would suffer during all the drama, actually improved. After Marcus Thorne heard about what I had been dealing with, he called me back. Turns out, the warning text I received that day had come from his wife, who had once been scammed by a family member herself. She had recognized the signs when she saw Serafina's name and did some quick research. Marcus offered me the contract, not in spite of what happened, but because of how I had handled it. He said anyone who could fight that hard for what was right would bring that same integrity to their work. I moved into Grandma's lake house. Every morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming across the water. I worked on the deck in summer, surrounded by the garden I maintained. I learned that peace isn't about having a perfect family. It's about protecting yourself from people who see you as a resource instead of a person. The money Grandma left me changed my life, but not in the way Serafina had hoped it would change hers. I paid off my student loans. I invested in my business. I donated a significant portion to the Beatrice Dubois Memorial Fund. And I saved enough to ensure I would never be financially desperate. Never be in a position where anyone could manipulate me with money again. 1 year after the arrests, I hosted a small gathering at the lake house. Not a family reunion, but a chosen family dinner. Marcus and his wife came. Aunt Lena was there. Anya Sharma, the nurse who had risked her job to help me, came with her husband. Elias Thorne and his wife joined us. We sat around Grandma's old dining table, eating good food, sharing stories, laughing without anyone calculating what they could get from anyone else. During dinner, I got a notification on my phone. The Beatrice Dubois Memorial Fund had just awarded its first scholarship to a nursing student named Lily Keller, who wanted to specialize in elder care. I showed everyone the announcement. Aunt Lena raised her glass and proposed a toast to Grandma, whose legacy would now help protect other elderly people from the kind of abuse she had suffered. As the sun set over the lake that evening, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, I thought about everything that had happened. I had lost my mother, my sister, and the illusion of the family I thought I had. But I had gained something far more valuable. I had gained my self-respect. I had learned to set boundaries. I had discovered that love should never cost you your dignity. I turned off my phone and watched the last light fade over the water. Grandma's house was finally at peace. And so was I. The family you choose is the family that matters. Not the one that shares your blood, but the one that respects your worth. I learned that the hard way, but I learned it completely, and I would never forget it again. So let me ask you something. Have you ever had to walk away from family because they were destroying you? Have you ever felt guilty for protecting yourself from people who were supposed to love you? Drop your story in the comments. You might help someone else realize they're not alone. Hit that like button if you believe in justice over obligation. And subscribe, because there are more stories like this. More truth about what happens when you finally stand up to toxic people. Remember, family is who shows up for you, not who shows up to take from you.